So yeah, fun time to be a fan. And I'm saving this bit entirely for the Boicast because obviously you can't have normal people know that I actually enjoy this shit. Yeah, headline is Israel Adesanya versus Jared Cannonier. I think we'll do that second because everyone who is watching this for Volkanovski versus Holloway. It's about as good a fight as ever was made. I don't know why I started speaking like the bard there, but I did. It's so high level. They've got a track record of two fantastic fights, and this is all or nothing for Max, and it's the only good opponent he's had to fight so far in his title reign for Volkanovski. So let's get right into it. I'm going to be using this as a preview on the main channel, so people who haven't checked it out, I just opened up the Advanced Striking 2.0 Alexander Volkanovski to everyone. It's probably not the sort of thing you're used to reading because it's all my doodles and talking about things that I really like that Alexander Volkanovski does. And there's a lot of being excited about how he uses the step up for the inside low kick to set up other things or just as a fake in itself. It's kind of in the weeds stuff. But yeah, it's I've had a few people tell me that they have had great success by copying some of the stuff in it, just in their day-to-day sparring. He's a very tricky dude. And I was thinking this because I was rewatching both fights in anticipation of talking about them today, and just because they're great fights and I hadn't watched them in a while. But it's fascinating that we had Aldo for so long, and in terms of activity, these two are the polar opposite of Jose Aldo. Aldo is as much as necessary. I'll engage as many times as I need to in a round to comfortably win it. And I will try and take their head off every single time, but I'm not going to do more than is necessary. Which is why the Rob Font fight was so weird, because he won that fight on not volume. He just had like 4 big punches in the entire fight, but they basically won each round for him. Whereas Max was all volume all the time from very early in his career, and Volkanovski is also all volume all the time. Which is a little bit more tricky because he is a bit more of a hitter than Holloway. But then that's just going on previous performance. That's not a promise of future results, because in their last fight, it was Holloway who hurt Volkanovski a lot more than Volkanovski hurt Holloway. Though Max does have one of the all-time great chins in MMA, I believe most strikes absorbed in the UFC, and nobody really talks about it because he's generally wins so impressively. So I was going to write a story so far article this week, but I didn't get around to it. But I'll give you the story so far. Fight 1 was largely dictated by Holloway trying to jab in from his orthodox stance, and Volkanovski sliding back and throwing the right low kick. Often with his guard up, sliding backwards. He does it in a way where it's basically just I want to say a leg kick, but think leg kick in the way we say arm punch, in that there wasn't an awful lot behind a lot of the kicks. He was just catching him as he was stepping in, and that's how you do real damage. You jar people's knees that way. And and Holloway was forced to switch to southpaw about halfway through. When he was southpaw, Volkanovski kept shooting the right straight and then stepping through into a shifting right hook, and that really gave Max some trouble. But Max had more success from southpaw in that fight. Basically, the key exchange that kept playing out in that fight was that Holloway wanted to step in and combination punch, and when he jabbed in, he bladed his stance to do it, and Volkanovski would hammer his leg and fuck it all up, and he either had to choose to stand southpaw, where he didn't really box in as well, or he had to try and take it and get in, and that didn't really work. When it came to the rematch, Holloway stood shorter and was far more active in his kicking. Loads of kicks. He used to throw loads of kicks. He had a fight with Anthony Pettis where he outkicked Anthony Pettis. It was just sort of people go through periods in their careers, and especially fighters who are good enough to adapt and learn, they get bored of one thing and they go on to another. Someone was asking me about, someone was asking on Reddit about Fedor's career and why he dropped off so abruptly. And it's like, you can look at his career. He had about, I think, 6 knockouts when he was about to meet Tim Sylvia. He'd fought 30, 40 fights by that point, but he had 6 knockouts. And everyone knew he was a massive hitter, but it was in the course of this all-around game where he was taking people down, beating them up, getting submissions. And then the last portion of his career was just all knockouts. I can't remember the last time he submitted anyone. And part of that's because he was very, very good and he got bored focusing on grappling. If you're training if you're training every day, all day, and it's your job, you want to try and mix it up in the workplace and do the things you enjoy. He always seemed to enjoy boxing a lot more. There was a lot more footage of him boxing than there was of him grappling. So people go through periods in their career where they will lose sight of some of the things that got them to the dance. In the second Volkanovski-Holloway fight, Holloway comes out shorter stance, showing lots of kicks, and showing the floating step, the fake teep, whatever you want to call it, where you lift the lead leg and you just hop in on your rear leg and you sort of glide in. It's not a very heavy hop. You're not going to hurt your knees doing it over time. It's the one you see all the time in Muay Thai. Helps if you teep first, or if you've got the threat of the teep, but the teep obviously not a big deal in MMA, so it's more just pick your leg up and float in. And you'll notice that Volkanovski does this all the time because he is worried about people stepping back and kicking him in the knee, or kicking him in the leg and jarring his knee when he's stepping forward. If you watch him against Ortega, the very first time Ortega kicks him in the leg, he immediately does a float in behind the lead leg and then a step up lead low kick off that, which I featured in the Advanced Striking 2.0 article. That floating step is really important as a way to move in as you wanted to originally without letting the guy slide back and time your foot coming in. Now, granted, you could probably slide back far enough and get a read on that floating step, but there's a lot of other stuff going on. They could kick you. They could jump into another kick. They could just float through and step in with a shifting elbow or something. And they could always come down on the jab like they wanted to in the first place. Whereas if someone is jabbing in, there's only one place their foot can be and one thing it can be doing, and that's holding them up. And the jab was an interesting part of the second fight too, because Holloway had much more success with his jab. Basically, as Volkanovski kicked, he stood there in his short stance, he'd check the kick or he'd take the kick but in a better position to take it, rather than compromised and stretched out in his stance. And the commentators are going, oh, did he do some shin condition? Did he have his thighs conditioned? Did he go home and let people kick him in the legs every day between now and then? Might have done, but also helps that he wasn't stretched out in his stance side on, as he was when he was jabbing in. So he's standing there taking the kicks and just popping the jab out from the shoulder, just an arm punch, rather than the step in with it. And he's catching Volkanovski on the snoot with it. Love that expression. A dude ran for... he won mayor of Chicago in the 1920s by claiming that the King of England wanted to take Chicago back. And if he got elected, he'd punch him on the snoot, which I think is fantastic. Not far removed from QAnon, which is... we're going to get into that with the QAnon warrior, Jared Cannonier, later. But whenever we're talking about this fight, I mean, jabs are important because Volkanovski has a great jab for being someone who's so much shorter than his opponents. And Holloway loves his jab and it leads into all his offense. But someone sent me a message the other day being like, Volkanovski wouldn't even push his advantages, even when he had a 2-inch reach advantage. And are you watching this fucking fight? Max is 5 inches taller. 2 inches of reach on someone 5 inches taller than you is not a range advantage. That's just not how it works. Try punching 5 inches up from your shoulder. And, if you're fighting someone your height, you're punching up from your shoulder. So just stand in front of a wall and put your hand out level with your shoulder so that your fingertips just touch the wall. Now move it up 5 inches without stepping closer. Very simple thought experiment there, or not even thought experiment, just practical demonstration of how height or punching up affects reach, or shortens your reach effectively. But what I really liked in that second fight also from Max, we talked about the floating step and the shorter stance, and I talked about that extensively. I think I gave him the slacky for Game Plan of the Year just because of how he turned it around from one fight to the next, and people were like, you can't give it to a losing performance. And I was like, felt he won. Get fucked. I watched it again today and I'm still surprised that Volkanovski got the scorecards. I mean, I'm not going to make a video calling it a robbery or anything, but I am still very surprised. And it just reminded me again how much I hate people who say, well, it was a close round, but to be the champ, you've got to beat the champ. You go, that's not in the official scoring criteria. What you're saying is that would have been a 10-10 round if I weren't a moron who had his own made-up criteria to guide me. But something I don't think I talked about last time was how well Max was dealing with the lateral movement of Volkanovski. Because if you watch a Volkanovski fight, and I don't think I talked about this in Advanced Striking 2.0 either, I left myself some leeway to talk more about Volkanovski because I'll always want to. But if you notice him, there's a lot of hand checking. So he'll stretch one hand out onto the opponent's hand and then put it back. or then the other hand, and he'll do a lot of like looking at people sideways, like he's a prey animal. You know, when a bird or something sits down outside your window, they'll give you side eye, and then they'll turn their head and give you side eye on the other side. And I've got a dynamic mic, so it might have picked up me doing that. They'll give you side eye, and then they'll give you side eye on the other side. But he does that. It's also like looking at yourself in the mirror after you've combed your hair back in the diner. But there's a lot of that moving the head side to side, and then he'll throw a right low kick and step out to his right side, or he'll fake the right low kick and step out to his right side. So there's a lot of lateral movement going on, and a lot of lateral or side-to-side head movement going on. And one of the things that I really liked about Max kicking more was that it punishes that quite well. If someone's already shorter and they're moving their head, that's a great way to make the most of being shorter. You know, the obvious examples of people like Jack Dempsey, Mike Tyson, Joe Frazier, all, of course, in a fists-only sport. But the more you can convince people to reach at you, the more you can get inside their punches, under their punches. If you can get them to punch down at you, you can come up and hit them in the head while their hands are down, or while they're throwing punches low. The downside, of course, is that when guys get good at that in MMA, like KJ Noons or Ross Pearson's the really obvious example, the secret against Ross Pearson was just to throw kicks at his head when he was bending forward. If you threw body kicks, and by body kicks I mean sort of shoulder height, so that if he slipped, he'd eat it. He then had to stand upright, so he had no head movement anymore, and you could poke him with jabs and things. All sorts of people did it to him. Masvidal did. Swanson knocked him out by kicking him in the head enough that he stood straight up. So yeah, Volkanovski doesn't go in for deep slips and things like that, but he does make use of level changes, and he does make use of moving his head side to side and stepping out to the side. And what Max was able to do with that was, if you noticed from the very first round of that rematch, he's throwing a slapping left hook, because it's not a pure left hook. He's not throwing it with a nice long stance with a pivot on his lead knee and doing the technique that would get him kneecapped by those low kicks. He's just slapping with it. It's almost open glove a lot of the time. And sometimes he's catching Volkanovski as Volkanovski's leaning towards it. Other times it's making Volkanovski lean away from it. And then you saw all those head kicks that landed or nearly landed. It always came off that slapping left. He'd do a little slap and then he throws right high kick, because if Volkanovski leaned, he's bringing himself into the kick. And a lot of the time, it didn't matter where his hands were. He wasn't in great position to absorb the kick in his guard without some of it hitting him in the head. Someone was telling me the other day that the pad man's always the biggest guy in the gym in Thailand. There was just one big fat Thai, and he's the pad man. But absorbing kicks, it's serious business. These are heavy strikes, especially if you've got someone who's flexible enough to throw good high kicks. And you have to be on position to take them. You're not really on position to take kicks when you're leaning down or sliding out the side door a lot of the time. And Max also capitalized on Volkanovski's side-to-side movement he was using his right high kick when Volkanovski moved to his left, to Volkanovski's left, that is, so towards Max's right. When Volkanovski went the other way, he timed it with the spinning back kick, and he hit him with a beautiful one in round one, which then immediately was followed by a left hook to right high kick that knocked him down. But he hit him with one in round 4 too. It was a really nice technique for him. And he's got a good back kick. He uses it at the right times. There are people who have absolutely beautiful mechanics on their back kick, but it doesn't matter. The more important thing is that you land it. And landing it means, for the most part, putting the guy to the boundary, or at least seeing that he's circling towards it, towards your kick, that is, or you shorten up the technique and try and spin on the spot or hop into it, so that you can catch them as they're stepping in. And then there were some nice knees that he timed as Volkanovski was stepping in. And what he was able to do by not feeding easy kicks and kicking back every time that Volkanovski kicked, which led to a sort of even situation on the feet outside, Volkanovski would then try and step into punch. And through that first fight, he'd been using the shifting right hook a lot. He'd been leaping in with left hooks. He was making, he's a shorter guy. He has to make some distance. And in doing that, he's got to do it quite quickly. So he's putting some momentum behind himself. So if he gets hit coming in, it's kind of a big deal. Max Holloway tried to time him with a few knees. He landed a couple of good stepping knees to the body. But more importantly, he said, "Guess who's going to jail?" and shot the right uppercut up the middle. One of the nicest right uppercuts I've seen in MMA. And through the first 2-3 rounds, it gave Volkanovski real trouble. Volkanovski got back into it by applying his own jab very well and left hook. pursuing takedowns, wasn't always successful with them, but just by showing them, you're more effective. And this is something that I've always criticized about Max. Very, very good fighter all round. Never even threatens the takedown most of the time. Whereas Volkanovski was showing, sometimes he's grabbing a hold and genuinely trying to get Max off his feet with all his might, as with the inside trip in the 5th round. It was, I'm going hell for leather on this. And I think he does like a big grunt as he's taking him down too. He was expending himself doing it. But he was also hitting those sort of Frankie Edgar post singles where you basically shoot your jab, open palm, into their lead shoulder. And at the same time, you reach down behind their lead leg. So you're pushing them in the shoulder so that their leg becomes lighter and you just run up into them and pick up their leg. And those are very low effort. You're never going to get sprawled on off doing those. You're never going to end up in a worse position off doing them. And a lot of the time, you'll see people do it and then just throw the right hand immediately after as the opponent's recovering their leg. And those are the kind of takedowns that I think every striker should be threatening all the time. Because if the guy isn't with it and just gets bundled to the mat, yeah, you can sit on top of him for 2-3 minutes. If he does react to it, you've got a great chance to chin him while he's in wrestling mode, or balancing mode even. Frankie Edgar used to pick it up against BJ Penn, who had amazing balance, and BJ Penn would be hopping backwards, and Frankie Edgar would just drop it and step up into a body kick or a head kick. And I think a large part of what got Volkanovski back into rounds 4 and 5 was a willingness to just bite down on his mouthpiece and step in and swing. And that's something that we were talking about in the Korean Zombie fight, but we talked about it quite a lot generally. His feints work because he's genuinely threatening when he starts trying to swing for real, and he swings for real often enough that the feints work, or that you have to respect the feints. As you can see by the fight metric stats of all his fights, as little as I respect counting strikes, but he puts out for someone who spends so much of the fight feinting and not throwing things, he still puts in amazing numbers of real strikes thrown and landed. Which brings us to the third fight, and obviously some stuff has changed since then. It's not that we've just been waiting on an immediate rematch. There have been some sort of complications getting the rematch together, and both of them have fought twice since then. That second fight was late 2020. Oh no, mid 2020. And since then, obviously, Volkanovski fought Brian Ortega, smashed him, was briefly in trouble in a triangle and a guillotine attempt, but the rest of that fight was one-way domination. And Chan Sung-jung, which was a fight that most people expected him to win, but not quite as blow the back doors off. Chan Sung-jung didn't do anything. Not quite that fashion. Meanwhile, Holloway's taken on Calvin Kattar, which was an incredible rebound performance, made Kattar look absolutely clueless. And then Yair Rodriguez, where, honestly, Holloway looked bad. And there's the intrigue of it, because Holloway's coming off what I would call a bad performance against Yair Rodriguez, and Volkanovski's coming off of an amazing performance against Chan Sung-jung. Now, some of that could be Chan Sung-jung being more washed than even people thought he was, and some of that could be Yair Rodriguez being better than people thought he was. And I certainly am falling on the side of Yair Rodriguez on that. I have mocked him quite a lot because he's a flashy, spinny person, and I'm always want to mock them. But and the fact that he's one of 2 fighters ever to get caught for 3 missed drug tests. If you want to know how USADA works, and all international drug testing, you're allowed to miss 3 tests in a 2-year period, which means that if you want to bang roids for 2 weeks, you just don't tell them where you are. Derek Brunson was telling off USADA going, I've got properties all over the US, and sometimes I need to, I don't know, go cross country to fix a washing machine or something. But it's a mixed bag, because firstly, these are independent contractors, so the employer shouldn't have access at all times to them of their life. They should have freedoms, unless you're going to pay them as employees and give them all the benefits of being an employee. On the other hand, it's very easy to cheat, and people have consistently forever. USADA just means that you don't come in looking like James Irving anymore. If you've ever seen James Irving in a fight, just Google James Irving. First picture on images will probably be him doing a Superman punch, striated and huge. But anyway, I had my beefs with Yair, but I thought he looked fantastic in that Holloway fight. And what he basically did was he didn't have to fight clever. He could just throw bollocks, round kicks and stuff all the time. No setups, nothing clever, just raw athleticism and a great pace. And in that fight, Holloway had to go to the takedowns, which he so rarely shows in his usual performances, that you knew something was up and that he wasn't very comfortable on the feet with him. And they weren't that bad. You know, the wrestling wasn't that bad. It was scrambly stuff, but it's something that Max doesn't really use. Whereas Volkanovski, you're always confident that he could try and pull it out of the bag. Sorry, just being reminded of Brian Ortega's corner going, you need to shoot the blast double now. And this is a guy who's 1-19 on takedowns in his UFC career. Just going to go out and blast double through a guy who won gold at the Australian Open or something like that. But he's a good wrestler, and Brian Ortega is not. And that's always the flaw. Whenever Brian Ortega fights anyone good, you have to know that his number one skill doesn't work unless the other guy is already half knocked out or just crap at one of the key elements of MMA. But anyway, sorry, I'm rambling here. Let's talk ideas for this match. I think Volkanovski